Jin-Ho stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive space station floating in the darkness. Above him, the Galactic Military Academy stretched across the void like a giant metal city with thousands of lights twinkling from its windows. And docking bays, he had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that he was here his stomach felt tight with worry. The docking bay buzzed with activity as new cadets from 12 different alien species walked around looking for their assigned rooms. Jin-Ho pulled his small bag closer to his chest and tried not to stare at the incredible beings around him. A group of Vorth cadets stood near the entrance talking in deep rumbling voices that made the floor vibrate under his feet. These reptilian warriors stood nearly 8 feet tall with thick green scales covering their bodies like natural armor. Their yellow eyes glowed in the dim light and their massive claws clicked against the metal floor when they moved not far from them. A cluster of Clix cadets moved in perfect formation. Their insect-like bodies seemed to flow like water as they walked on 4 legs, while their upper arms gestured rapidly in what Jin-Ho guessed was their native language. Their compound eyes reflected the station lights like tiny mirrors, and their movements were so fast that Jin-Ho could barely follow them with his own eyes. The most fascinating creatures were the Nethara, who seemed to float just above the ground. Their pale blue skin was almost transparent, and Jin-Ho could see strange patterns of light moving under their flesh. Like living tattoos, one of them noticed him staring and simply vanished for a moment before appearing again. Several feet away, the other Nethara around her laughed in voices that sounded like wind chimes. Jin-Ho realized he was the only human in sight and suddenly felt very small and very alone. He was average height for his species at about 5 feet 10 inches, but compared to most of the aliens around him, he might as well have been a child. His brown hair was cut short in military style, and his dark eyes held a determination that had carried him through years of preparation for this momenta. Mechanical voice echoed through the docking bay announcing that all new cadets should report to their assigned dormitories. Jin-Ho checked his data pad and saw that he was assigned to room 847 in the Gamma Wing. He shouldered his bag and started walking through the corridors, following the signs and trying not to get lost. The academy was even more impressive from the inside than it had looked from space. The walls were made of some kind of metal that seemed to glow with its own light, and the ceilings stretched high above his head, covered with displays showing star maps and tactical information. Portraits of famous graduates lined the hallways, showing warriors from dozens of different species who had gone on to become legends. Jin-Ho found his room after 20 minutes of walking and pressed his palm against the scanner beside the door. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and he stepped inside to find his roommate already there. A massive Vorth was arranging his belongings on one of the 2 beds that took up most of the small room. The alien turned to look at Jin-Ho, and his yellow eyes narrowed in what might have been disappointment or annoyance. He was even bigger than the Vorth Jin-Ho had seen in the docking bay, with scars across his scaled face that spoke of previous battles. His voice was deep and rough when he spoke. "You must be the human I am, Cracks of the Vorth Empire. I have heard that humans were accepted into the academy, but I did not believe it until now." He looked Jin-Ho up and down like he was examining a strange insect. "Tell me, human, what special abilities do your people possess?" Jin-Ho set his bag down on the empty bed and tried to keep his voice steady. "We do not have natural armor like your people, or speed like the Clix. We cannot phase through matter like the Nethara. We are just human." Cracks made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like rocks grinding together. "Just human," he repeated. "Then why are you here? This academy is for warriors, not for weak creatures who will die." In the first battle, before Jin-Ho could answer, the door opened again, and a tall figure in an instructor uniform entered. The newcomer was a Clix with battle scars across his insect-like body and medals covering his chest, his compound eyes fixed on both cadets as he spoke in a voice that clicked and buzzed. "I am Instructor Velox, and I will be your primary combat trainer. Both of you will report to the main assembly hall in 30 minutes for orientation. Do not be late. The academy has a 90% dropout rate, and I intend to help maintain that standard." After the instructor left, Cracks turned back to Jin-Ho with something that might have been pity in his ancient eyes. "Human, you should consider leaving now before you embarrass yourself and your species. This place will break you in ways you cannot imagine." Jin-Ho unpacked his few belongings in silence while Krax continued to watch him. The Vorth seemed genuinely puzzled by his presence, as if Jinho were a puzzle he could not solve. Finally, Krax shook his massive head and left the room to explore the academy alone. At last Jinho sat on his bed and pulled out a small photo of his family back on Earth. His parents had been so proud when he was accepted to the academy. Even though only 3 humans had ever been admitted in the school history, they believed he could succeed where others might fail. He thought about the years of preparation he had gone through, physical training until his body ached, mental exercises until his brain felt like it might explode, studying every piece of information he could find about alien military tactics and technology. His test scores had been perfect, but he knew that would not be enough. Here the assembly hall was enormous, with a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside. Hundreds of cadets from 12 different species filled the rows of seats, with humans being the smallest group by far. Jinho counted exactly 3, including himself, sitting in different sections of the huge room. A stern-looking Etherian took the stage and began speaking about the academy history and traditions. Her voice carried easily through the hall as she explained that only the strongest and smartest would survive to become galactic defenders. The weak would be sent home in disgrace. As she spoke, Jinho noticed other cadets looking at him and the other humans. Some seemed curious, but many more seemed dismissive or even hostile. A group of Nithara cadets, led by a particularly arrogant-looking female named Jis, kept glancing in his direction and whispering among themselves. During the meal that followed orientation, Jinho sat alone at a small table while alien cadets filled the other seats around the dining hall. The food was strange but edible, and he ate in silence while listening to conversations in dozens of different languages. A quiet Etherian female approached his table and asked if she could sit down. Jinho nodded, and she settled gracefully into the chair across from him. Her people were tall and thin, with pale skin and large eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. I am Yuki, she said in perfect English. I wanted to meet one of the human cadets. Most of us have never seen your species before. Jinho introduced himself, and they talked quietly about their homeworlds and what had brought them to the academy. Yuki seemed genuinely interested in human culture and asked thoughtful questions about Earth. She was the first alien to treat him as an equal rather than a curiosity. As they talked, Jinho began to feel slightly more hopeful. Maybe he could find friends here. Maybe he could prove that humans belonged among the galaxy's greatest warriors. But deep down he knew that the real test was just beginning, and that tomorrow would bring challenges he could barely imagine. The first day at the Galactic Military Academy was ending, but Jinho knew that his real journey was just starting. He would need every bit of determination and intelligence he possessed to survive what was coming next. The alarm screamed through the dormitory at 5 in the morning, and Jinho rolled out of bed instantly. His body ached from the previous day's training, but he had learned to ignore pain. Weeks ago, Krax was already up and moving toward the door, his massive frame making the small room feel even smaller. Physical conditioning begins in 10 minutes, human, Krax said without looking back. You will want to stretch first, or you will not be able to walk afterwards. Jinho quickly pulled on his training uniform and followed his roommate through the corridors toward the main gymnasium. The academy never slept, and cadets from different time zones were always coming and going, creating a constant buzz of activity. The gymnasium was a massive space with equipment designed for dozens of different alien physiologies. Jinho had never seen anything like it back on Earth. There were gravity wells for species that needed heavy environments, obstacle courses that stretched up toward the ceiling, and training weapons that hummed with energy. Instructor Velox stood in the center of the room holding a datapad and clicking his mandibles in what Jinho had learned was either annoyance or concentration. The Clicks warrior looked at the assembled cadets and began barking orders in his harsh, buzzing voice. Today, we run the endurance course, he announced. Each of you will complete 5 laps around the academy perimeter. The slowest 10% will receive extra training after dinner. Jinho felt his stomach drop. The academy perimeter was nearly 20 miles of corridors, and the artificial gravity was set higher than Earth normal to accommodate the larger alien species. He had been training for months, but he still struggled to keep up with beings who were naturally stronger and faster. The cadets lined up at the starting line, and Jinho found himself next to Yuki, who gave him an encouraging smile. She was the only alien who had consistently treated him with kindness, and he was grateful for her friendship. The starting signal echoed through the corridor, and the cadets took off like a stampede. Jin-ho immediately fell behind as Vorth cadets thundered past him with their powerful legs eating up the distance. Click's cadets skittered along the walls and ceiling, using their multiple limbs to move faster than any human could. Run by the first mile, Jin-ho was gasping for breath, and his legs felt like they were made of lead. A group of Nathara cadets floated past him, laughing and making jokes about the slow human who thought he could be a warrior. Jin-ho kept running even though every step hurt the arrogant. Nathara female appeared beside him, floating effortlessly while he struggled to maintain his pace. Perhaps you should consider becoming a cook instead of a warrior, she said, with a cruel smile. Humans are better suited for serving meals than fighting battles. Jin-ho did not have enough breath to respond, but he forced himself to keep moving forward one step at a time. He told himself, just keep moving forward. By the third mile, he was alone in the corridor. The other cadets had either finished or were so far ahead that he could not see them. His lungs burned and his vision was starting to blur from exhaustion. But something deep inside him refused to give up. He thought about his parents back on Earth, who had worked extra jobs to pay for his academy application. He thought about every human who had ever been told they were too weak or too slow to matter. He thought about the 3 humans who had attended the academy before him, and how they had all washed out in the first month. When he finally crossed the finish line 40 minutes after the last alien cadet, Instructor Velox was waiting for him. With his datapad, the Click's warrior looked at Jin-ho with what might have been disappointment or pity. Cadet Jin-ho, you finished dead last by a margin of 15 minutes. He said, clicking his mandibles. Your performance in physical training has been consistently poor. You should consider whether you belong here. Jin-ho straightened his aching back and looked the instructor in his compound eyes. I will improve, sir, he said between gasps for breath. I will not give up. Velox studied him for a long moment, then made a note on his datapad. Report to weapons training in 30 minutes. Do not be late. Weapons training facility was filled with advanced plasma rifles, energy swords, and projectile weapons from dozens of different worlds. Jin-ho had studied the technical manuals for all of them, but holding the actual weapons was completely different. His first attempts at marksmanship were disasters. The plasma rifle was heavier than he expected, and the recoil nearly knocked him over. His shots went wide of the target, while alien cadets around him hit bullseyes with casual ease. During hand-to-hand combat training, things got even worse. Krax volunteered to spar with him, and the match lasted exactly 3 seconds. The Vorth warrior simply grabbed Jin-ho around the waist and lifted him off the ground like he was a child. Other cadets began gathering around to watch. Whenever Jin-ho sparred someone, started a betting pool on how long he would last before washing out of the academy. The odds were not in his favor. After 2 weeks of constant failure, Jin-ho found himself alone in the academy library at midnight while his classmates slept. He had discovered that he could not match their physical abilities, but he could study harder than any of them. The library contained millions of tactical manuals, battle histories, and strategic analyses from conflicts across the galaxy. Jin-ho read everything he could find about asymmetric warfare, unconventional tactics, and how smaller forces had defeated larger ones throughout history. He learned about the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off a massive Persian army. He studied the Vietnam War, where guerrilla fighters defeated a technologically superior enemy. He read about David and Goliath and how cleverness could overcome brute strength. During tactical simulation classes, Jin-ho started scoring higher than most of his classmates. His written exams were perfect, and his strategic analyses impressed even the toughest instructors, but his physical performance remained poor. Instructor Velox called him into his office after a particularly bad day of combat training. The Click's warrior sat behind his desk looking at Jin-ho with those unreadable compound eyes. Cadet Jin-ho, your academic performance is excellent, he said, but warfare is not fought with books and theories. You need speed, strength, and reflexes to survive in combat. Jin-ho sat straight in his chair and met the instructor gaze. I understand, sir, but I believe there are other ways to contribute to a military unit. Velox clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps, he said, but this academy trains frontline warriors, not support staff. If you cannot keep up physically, you will endanger your Entire unit. The instructor leaned forward and his voice became almost gentle. I have seen many promising cadets wash out because they could not accept their limitations. There is no shame in recognizing that you are not suited for combat. Jinho felt something burning in his chest that he had never experienced before. It was not anger exactly, but a fierce determination that surprised him with its intensity. Sir, I request permission to continue training, he said. I know I can find a way to contribute. Velox studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well, but I will be watching you closely. The first major combat simulation is next week. If you cannot perform adequately, I will recommend your transfer to the engineering division. That night, Jinho lay in his bed listening to Crack's snore and thinking about everything he had learned. The other cadets were stronger and faster, but they relied entirely on their natural abilities. They never studied tactics or strategy because they had never needed to. Maybe that was his advantage. Maybe being physically weaker would force him to think differently about combat. Maybe his human perspective could offer something that alien warriors had never considered. He thought about a conversation he had overheard between two cliques cadets who were discussing the upcoming simulation. They were confident that their speed and natural weapons would guarantee victory. But Jinho had read the simulation parameters and he suspected that brute force would not be enough. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jinho smiled. He was starting to understand that there might be more than one way to be a warrior. The next morning brought another brutal day of physical training, but Jinho approached it differently. Instead of trying to match the other cadets' strength, he focused on efficiency and technique. He studied how they moved and looked for patterns and weaknesses during weapons training. He stopped trying to outshoot everyone and instead concentrated on understanding how each weapon worked and when it would be most effective. He asked questions that surprised the instructors and showed insights that even veteran warriors had not considered. Yuki noticed the change in him during lunch and asked what was different. I think I'm starting to understand what I'm supposed to do here. Jinho told her, I may not be the strongest or fastest, but maybe I can be something else. What do you mean? She asked with genuine curiosity. Jinho smiled and looked around the dining hall at all the powerful alien warriors. Maybe I can be the one who thinks. The morning of the first major combat simulation arrived with an announcement that made every cadet in the academy stop what they were doing. Jinho was eating breakfast when Instructor Velox's voice boomed through the dining hall speakers. All cadets, report to Simulation Bay 7 immediately. Today you will face the Omega Protocol. This exercise has a 60% casualty rate. Failure means immediate review for Academy dismissal. Jinho felt his stomach clench, but he forced himself to finish his meal while chaos erupted around him. Alien cadets were shouting in multiple languages, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Even the normally confident Vorth warriors looked nervous. The simulation bay was enormous, with walls that could project any environment imaginable. Jinho had read about the Omega Protocol in the Academy archives. It was designed to test everything a cadet had learned about tactics, weapons, and teamwork. Under extreme pressure, Instructor Velox stood before the assembled cadets with his compound eyes reflecting the harsh lights overhead. Behind him, a massive display showed the mission parameters. You will be divided into teams of 5 cadets each, he announced. Your objective is to infiltrate the enemy stronghold, rescue the hostages, and extract to the landing zone. The enemy forces are numerous, well-armed, and highly motivated. Jinho listened as the instructor explained the rules. Each team would face the same scenario, but in different virtual environments. The simulation would feel completely real, including pain from simulated injuries. Teams that failed to complete their mission would face immediate academic review. The team assignments appeared on the display, and Jinho felt his heart sink. He was assigned to Team Delta, with some of the most difficult cadets in the academy. Cracks, the massive Vorth, who still treated him like a burden. Just the arrogant Nithara, who had made it clear she thought humans were worthless. Rizek, a hot-headed cliques warrior who solved every problem with violence, and surprisingly Yuki, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. Team Delta, report to Simulation Chamber 4. Velox announced the scenario begins in exactly 10 minutes. The simulation chamber was a blank white room filled with advanced projection equipment that would create their virtual battlefield. Jin-ho stood with his teammates as they received their equipment standard plasma rifles, tactical armor, and communication. Device Cracks immediately took charge of the team planning session. His deep voice rumbled as he outlined a direct assault strategy. "We move fast and hit hard," he said. "My armor can absorb their weapons while you provide covering for as is floated." Nearby, with her arms crossed in disapproval, "That is a primitive approach," she said. "We should use stealth. I can phase through their defenses and create confusion while you attack from outside." Azak clicked his mandibles aggressively. "Speed is the key," he insisted. "We move too fast for them to target us. Strike quickly and retreat before they can respond." All three aliens turned to look at Jin-ho as if suddenly remembering he was there. "What do you think?" Human Ji's asked with obvious sarcasm. "Do you have some brilliant human strategy?" To Shere. Jin-ho had been studying the mission parameters while they argued, and he had noticed something important. The enemy stronghold was designed like a fortress from Earth history with multiple defensive layers and choke points. "Actually, I think we need to approach this differently," he said quietly. "The enemy is expecting us to attack in one of three ways: frontal assault, stealth, infiltration, or hit and run." Tacti Scrax snorted dismissively. "So what do you suggest we do?" "Dance with them." Jin-ho pulled up the tactical display and pointed to specific locations on the map. "I suggest we make them think we are doing one thing while actually doing something completely different." The simulation began, and Team Delta found themselves in a rugged mountain environment with the enemy stronghold visible in the distance. Initial reconnaissance showed heavily armed defenders patrolling the perimeter with automated weapons covering all approaches. The first three teams had already begun their missions, and Jin-ho could hear explosions and weapons fire echoing through the virtual landscape. Team Alpha had attempted a frontal assault and was pinned down by heavy fire. Team Beta tried stealth and walked into a trap. Team Charlie was using hit-and-run tactics but making little progress. "This is hopeless," Ji said as she watched another team get decimated. "The defenses are too strong." Jin-ho studied the battlefield through his scope and began issuing quiet instructions. "Cracks, I need you to move to that ridge and start firing at the main gate. Make as much noise as possible, but do not actually try to breach it." The fourth warrior looked confused but followed orders. His plasma rifle began hammering the gate, creating massive explosions that drew every enemy soldier. "Attention, Rizak," Jin-ho continued. "I need you to circle around to the east side and make quick attacks on their patrol units, but retreat immediately when they respond. Make them think you are trying to find a weak point." The Click's warrior buzzed with excitement and scuttled away to begin his harassment attacks. Soon, the eastern side of the stronghold was in chaos as defenders rushed to respond to his hit and run. "Tacticious," Jin-ho said, "you are going to phase through the western wall but not to attack. I need you to locate the hostages and mark their position, then get out without being detected." The Nethara female looked surprised but nodded and began moving toward her assigned position while his teammates executed their roles. Jin-ho and Yuki moved to a position that none of the enemy defenders were watching. The brilliant part of Jin-ho's plan was that while the enemy was focused on the obvious attacks from three directions, they completely ignored the fourth approach. Jin-ho had studied the fortress design and realized that the builders had made the same mistake as many historical fortifications. They had focused on obvious threats while leaving subtle vulnerabilities. Working together, Jin-ho and Yuki found a maintenance tunnel that led directly under the stronghold. The enemy had sensors watching for large groups, but two small figures moving carefully through the drainage system were beneath their notice. Inside the fortress, Jin-ho movements were precise and calculated. He had memorized the layout from Ji's reconnaissance and knew exactly where to go. The hostages were being held in the central tower while most of the defenders were manning the walls against the decoy attacks. The rescue itself took less than 5 minutes. Jin-ho and Yuki freed the hostages and began leading them through the same tunnel they had used to enter. Meanwhile, the other team members continued their diversionary attacks, keeping the enemy focused on the wrong locations. When Team Delta emerged from the tunnel system with all hostages rescued, the other teams were still struggling with the outer defenses. The simulation ended with a victory announcement that shocked everyone watching. "Team Delta mission complete," announced the simulation computer. "All objectives achieved with 0 casualties." In the debriefing room, instructor Vlok stood in front of the tactical display showing Team Delta mission Replay. His compound eyes moved rapidly as he analyzed every decision and movement. This is the first time in Academy history that a team has completed the Omega protocol with perfect scores, he said, clicking his mandibles in what Jinho had learned was amazement. The other cadets stared at Team Delta with new respect. Cracks looked at Jinho with something approaching awe, while Jia simply nodded in acknowledgement of his tactical brilliance. Even Rizik, who normally solved problems with violence, admitted that the human strategy had been superior to anything he could have imagined. But it was Yuki's reaction that meant the most to Jinho. She smiled and said quietly, "I knew you had it in you." As news of Team Delta's success spread through the academy, Jinho realized that everything had changed. The same cadets who had mocked him for being weak and slow now looked at him with curiosity and respect. Instructor Velox approached him after the debriefing and spoke in a voice that held no trace of his earlier doubts. Cadet Jinho, that was exceptional tactical thinking. You saw possibilities that escaped every other cadet, including some with decades of military experience. Jinho felt a warmth spread through his chest. That had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with finally understanding his place in the galaxy. "Thank you, sir," he said, "but I could not have done it without my team." Velox clicked his mandibles in what Jinho now recognized as approval. "Perhaps, but you showed them how to use their abilities in ways they had never considered. That is the mark of a true leader." That night, Jinho lay in his bed listening to Cracks sleep and thinking about how much had changed. The massive Vorth warrior had actually thanked him for the victory, something Jinho would never have imagined possible. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jinho felt like he truly belonged here. He had found his place among the galaxy greatest warriors, not as the strongest or fastest, but as someone who could see what others missed and help them achieve things they never thought possible. The real test was still ahead, but Jinho was no longer afraid. He had discovered that being human was not a weakness to overcome, but a strength to embrace. The academy corridors buzzed with excited conversations the morning after Team Delta victory. Jinho walked to breakfast and noticed something he had never experienced before. Other cadets were stepping aside to let him pass and nodding respectfully. As he went by, the dining hall felt unusually quiet when he entered, and Jinho felt hundreds of alien eyes watching his every move. He selected his usual simple breakfast and looked around for an empty table, but found Yuki waving him over to where she sat with several other cadets. "Jinho, this is Hassan Vorth from the eastern colonies and Dea Clix from the outer rim worlds," Yuki said as he sat down. "They wanted to meet the cadet who solved the Omega Protocol." Wan leaned forward with obvious curiosity. "In all my years of military training, I have never seen tactics like yours," he said in his deep, rumbling voice. "Where did you learn to think like that?" Jinho felt uncomfortable with the attention, but answered honestly, "I studied human military history and tried to apply old strategies to new situations. Most of our greatest victories came from doing the unexpected." Day clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The way you coordinated 3 separate diversions while executing the real mission was masterful," he said. "My instructors back home always said that the best warriors think 10 moves ahead." Before Jinho could respond, Cracks appeared at the table carrying a tray of food. The massive Vorth warrior sat down heavily and looked directly at Jinho with his yellow eyes. "I owe you an apology, human," he said in a voice that carried across the dining hall. "I called you weak and said you did not belong here. I was wrong." The entire dining hall had gone completely silent now, and Jinho realized that every cadet in the academy was listening to this conversation. He felt his face grow hot, but he met Crack's gaze steadily. "You do not need to apologize," Jinho said quietly. "You were judging me by standards that made sense to you. I had to prove myself by different standards." Cracks nodded slowly and extended one massive clawed hand. "You led us to victory when I would have led us to defeat. You are a warrior, Jinho of Earth, and I am honored to call you Timothy." Jinho shook the offered hand and felt the sincerity in the Vorth grip around them. The dining hall erupted in approving sounds from dozens of different species. It was the first time Jinho had ever felt truly accepted at the academy. Throughout the day, Jinho found himself approached by cadets who had previously ignored him. A group of Nithara apologized for their earlier mockery and asked if he would review their tactical assignments. Several Clix warriors requested his opinion on assault strategies. Even some of the proud Etherian cadets sought his advice on leadership techniques. The most surprising encounter came during weapons training when Jess approached him with an expression that might have been embarrassment on her pale blue features. Human, I must speak with you, she said, floating beside him as he practiced with a plasma rifle. Jinho lowered his weapon and turned to face her. What is it, Jess? The arrogant Nithara, who had spent weeks mocking him, now looked uncertain and almost vulnerable. I have been thinking about yesterday's simulation, she said. You gave me a task that played to my natural abilities, but also served the greater strategizing. Ho nodded. That is what good tactics do. They use everyone's strengths in the most effective ways. Hess was quiet for a long moment, then continued, I have always believed that Nithara were superior to other species because we can phase through matter. But you showed me that even superior abilities are worthless without proper planning and coordination. She paused and looked directly at him with her large, silvery eyes. I was wrong about humans, and I was wrong about you. You may not have our natural gifts, but you have something else. Something that makes you dangerous in ways I never considered. Jinho felt a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy for the alien warrior. What do you mean? Hiss gestured around the training facility at all the different species, practicing with various weapons. Look at all of us, she said. We are all focused on perfecting our individual abilities, but you think about how to make the whole team stronger. That is a gift that none of our species seem to possess naturally. Later that afternoon, Jinho received a message to report to instructor Vlok's office immediately. He walked through the academy corridors with a growing sense of nervousness, wondering if he had somehow made a mistake. Vlok's office was filled with tactical displays, showing battle formations from across the galaxy. The Click's warrior looked up from his desk as Jinho entered and gestured for him to sit down. Cadet Jinho, I have been reviewing your performance since arriving at the academy, Vlok said, clicking his mandibles slowly. Your physical scores remain below average, but your tactical assessments have been remarkable. Jinho sat straight in his chair and waited for the instructor to continue. I have been teaching at this academy for 20 years, Vlok continued. I have trained thousands of cadets from dozens of species. I have never seen anyone demonstrate the kind of strategic thinking you displayed yesterday. The instructor pulled up a holographic display showing the Omega Protocol mission from multiple angles. Your solution was elegant, efficient, and completely unexpected. He said even experienced officers watching the simulation were impressed by your approach. Jinho felt a warmth spreading through his chest, but he kept his voice steady. Thank you, sir. I just tried to use what I had learned from studying military history. Vlok leaned back in his chair and studied Jinho with his compound eyes. That is exactly what makes you dangerous, he said. Most cadets rely on their natural abilities and standard training, but you think like a general, not just a soldier. The instructor made several notes on his datapad and then looked back at Jinho. And recommending you for advanced tactical training, he said. There is a special program for cadets who show exceptional strategic potential, only 5 cadets per year are selected. Jinho felt his heart racing, but he managed to ask, what does that mean, sir? It means that in addition to your regular training, you will study directly with senior officers and participate in complex strategic simulations, Vlok explained. It also means that your future in the Galactic Defense Force will likely involve command positions rather than frontline combat. That evening, Jinho found himself in the Academy observation deck looking out at the stars and thinking about how much his life had changed in just one day. A few weeks ago, he had been the laughingstock of the Academy. Now he was being considered for advanced leadership training. Yuki found him there and sat down beside him on the bench facing the massive viewport. You look thoughtful, she said with a gentle smile. Jinho turned to look at his friend and realized that she had been watching him more carefully than he had noticed. I was just thinking about how different things are now, he said. Yuki nodded. I always knew you had potential, she said. Most of the other cadets were so focused on your physical limitations that they never bothered to notice your intelligence. Jinho looked at her with curiosity. How did you know? Yuki smiled and pointed to her large eyes. Etherians value wisdom over strength, she said. We learn to recognize intelligence in all its forms. Your species may be physically unremarkable, but your minds work in fascinating ways. She paused and looked out at the stars. I have been studying human history since meeting you, she continued. Your species has survived and thrived. Despite being surrounded by predators and natural disasters, You have conquered your entire planet not through strength but through cooperation and innovation, Jinho. Felt a new understanding dawning. That is what I tried to do in the simulation, he said. Use cooperation and innovation instead of brute force, exactly, Yuki said. And that is why you will be successful here. The galaxy needs warriors who can think, not just fight. As they sat together watching the stars, Jinho realized that he had found more than just acceptance at the academy. He had found his purpose. The same qualities that had made him seem weak and unsuitable for military life were actually his greatest strengths. The next morning brought news that spread through the academy like wildfire. Jinho tactical scores had broken records that had stood for decades. His strategic analysis of the Omega protocol was being studied by senior officers throughout the Galactic Defense Force. Cadets who had never spoken to him before now sought his advice on everything from weapons selection to unit coordination. The betting pool on when he would wash out had been replaced by speculation about what kind of leadership position he would eventually hold, but the most meaningful change came from his original teammates. Cracks began introducing him to other cadets as the tactical genius who had saved their mission. Jez publicly acknowledged that she had learned more about strategy from one human than from years of traditional training. Rizek started asking Jinho to review his mission plans before every exercise. Jinho walked through the academy corridors with his head held high. For the first time since arriving, the alien warriors around him no longer saw a weak human who did not belong. They saw a strategic mind that could help them achieve things they never thought possible. Transformation was complete, but Jinho knew that the real challenges were still ahead. Advanced tactical training would push him in new ways, and his eventual graduation would depend on performances that made the Omega Protocol look simple. But for the first time since leaving Earth, Jinho felt truly confident in his abilities. He had proven that human intelligence could compete with alien strength, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon was the ability to think differently. 6 months had passed since Jinho arrival at the academy, and the final graduation exercise was announced with a ceremony that made every cadet stop what they were doing. The academy commander herself stood before the assembled students, a legendary Etherian warrior whose tactical brilliance had saved entire star systems. The Crucible, she announced in a voice that carried absolute authority. This is the test that separates true warriors from mere soldiers. For 300 years it has determined who earns the right to become a galactic defender. Jinho sat in the massive auditorium surrounded by the cadets who had survived the academy brutal training regimen. Less than half of those who had started remained, and each one represented the best their species had to offer. The rules are simple, the commander continued. Each cadet will command a unit of 20 junior cadets in a 5-day combat simulation. The scenario recreates humanity's first contact war when Earth forces faced invasion by a technologically superior enemy. Jinho felt his blood turn cold as he realized the implications. He would be commanding a unit defending Earth against alien invaders played by his own classmates who knew his every strength and weakness. Your performance will be evaluated on tactical decisions, casualty rates, and mission success, the commander explained. Only those who demonstrate exceptional leadership under impossible odds will graduate. Failure means immediate dismissal from the program. That evening, Jinho stood in his room looking at the tactical briefing materials while Cracks watched him with concern. The massive Vorth had become a true friend over the months, and his worry was obvious. "This is not fair, human," he said in his deep rumbling voice. "They are making you defend your own species' homeworld against aliens while surrounded by aliens who know exactly how you think." Jinho studied the simulation parameters and felt a mixture of fear and determination. The scenario was historically accurate. Earth forces had been outnumbered 10-1 with primitive weapons facing energy shields and plasma cannons. "I think that might be the point," Jinho said quietly. "The test is not just about tactics, it is about handling pressure and making decisions when everything is personal." Yuki appeared in the doorway holding her own briefing materials and looking unusually serious. "I have been assigned to the invasion force," she said apologetically. "I will be commanding one of the units attacking your positions." Jinho nodded and tried to keep his voice steady. "I understand you have to do your best, and so do I." Simulation began 3 days later in the Academy's most advanced training facility. Jinho found himself standing in a perfect recreation of the hills outside Seoul, looking down at a city that could have been his childhood home. The junior cadets under his command were a mix of species, but they all looked to him. For leadership, his communication device crackled with reports from his scouts. Enemy forces approaching from multiple directions. Sir, estimated strength 2,000 soldiers with heavy weapons and air support. Jin-ho looked through his tactical display at the forces arrayed against him. Cracks commanded a unit of Vorth warriors approaching from the east. Shes-led Nathara faced troops from the north. Rizik brought click-speed fighters from the west, and Yuki coordinated the overall assault from the south. The enemy forces were everything Jin-ho had feared technologically. Superior, numerically overwhelming, and commanded by the same cadets who had studied his tactical methods for months. They knew exactly what he was likely to do, but Jin-ho had spent weeks preparing for this moment. He had studied every detail of the historical battle and noticed something that the original Earth defenders had missed. The alien invasion force had the same weakness as every military organization they followed. Predictable patterns instead of trying to hold fixed positions like the historical defenders. Jin-ho began implementing a strategy that even he found terrifying. He divided his forces into small mobile units and abandoned the high ground that military doctrine said he should defend. His first orders confused even his own junior cadets. Sir, we should establish defensive positions on the ridgeline, said a young Vorth cadet. Those heights give us clear fields of fire. Jin-ho shook his head and pointed to the tactical display. The enemy expects us to defend the high ground, which means they have planned their attack accordingly. We are going to let them have it. What Jin-ho had realized was that the simulated alien invasion force was following the same tactical patterns as the historical invaders. They assumed that human defenders would fight conventionally and had prepared for a traditional siege warfare scenario. Instead, Jin-ho ordered his units to withdraw from the obvious defensive positions and establish hidden bases throughout the urban environment. The enemy would capture the high ground easily, but find themselves controlling empty hills while the real battle was fought in the streets. Below, the first day of combat went exactly as Jin-ho had predicted. Crack's Vorth warriors stormed the ridgeline, expecting fierce resistance but found only empty fortifications. Nathara troops phased through the abandoned defensive walls and discovered they had captured worthless terrain. Meanwhile, Jin-ho mobile units began hitting supply convoys and communication centers throughout the invasion zone. The enemy forces controlled the major landmarks but could not move safely through the territory they had supposedly conquered. Yuki realized what was happening first and tried to adapt her strategy. But the other unit commanders were locked into their original plans. Cracks continued trying to force Jin-ho out of the high ground that he had already abandoned. Josephs kept phasing through buildings looking for fixed positions that did not exist. By the second day, the simulated invasion force was experiencing casualties at an alarming rate. Jin-ho units would appear, launch devastating attacks on vulnerable targets, and disappear back into the urban environment. The enemy had superior weapons, but could not bring them to bear on opponents who refused to fight conventionally. The academy instructors monitoring the simulation began gathering around the tactical displays as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A numerically inferior force using primitive weapons was systematically dismantling a technologically advanced invasion army. On the third day, Jin-ho implemented the most audacious part of his strategy. He ordered his units to begin capturing alien equipment and turning it against the invaders. Every enemy soldier killed meant another plasma rifle for human defenders. Every destroyed vehicle provided spare parts for improvised weapons. The psychological impact was devastating for the alien forces. They had expected to face terrified primitives. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that adapted and learned from every encounter. Jin-ho forces began using alien technology more effectively than the aliens themselves just tried to counter. By having her Nathara troops phase directly into Jin-ho command centers, but discovered that he had established multiple false headquarters while keeping his real command structure mobile and hidden. Cracks attempted to use his Vorth warriors' superior strength to simply bulldoze through the urban environment, but found that narrow streets and improvised obstacles neutralized his advantages. By the fourth day, even Yuki's tactical brilliance could not overcome the strategic situation. The invasion Force controlled most of the terrain but had lost nearly 60% of their effective strength. Morale was collapsing as unit commanders realized they were being outfought by an enemy they had expected to crush Izalith the final day of the simulation. Brought the decisive moment. Jinho had been conserving his forces while the enemy exhausted themselves trying to control territory that gave them no strategic advantage. Now he launched a coordinated counterattack that hit every enemy position. Simultaneously, the alien forces had spread themselves too thin trying to hold ground that Jinho had never intended to defend. His concentrated attack shattered their extended lines and sent them retreating in disorder toward their landing zones. When the simulation ended, Jinho stood on the same hilltop where he had started 5 days earlier, but now it overlooked a battlefield littered with the wreckage of the defeated invasion force. His casualty rates were the lowest in Academy history, while his tactical objectives had been achieved completely. The debriefing session was unlike anything the Academy had ever seen. The Academy commander stood before the assembled cadets with an expression of amazement that she could not hide. Cadet Jinho has achieved something that military analysts considered impossible, she announced. He has demonstrated that superior tactics can overcome any technological or numerical advantage. The tactical display showed the battle from multiple angles, highlighting decisions that had seemed insane at the time but had proven to be brilliant in retrospect. This simulation has been run thousands of times with different scenarios and commanders. The commander continued, no one has ever achieved a victory margin this decisive while maintaining such low casualties. Jinho looked around the room at his fellow cadets and saw expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. Crack shook his massive head in amazement while Ji simply stared at him with new respect. Even Yuki, who had known him best, seemed surprised by what he had accomplished, but the Academy commander was not finished. Your performance has attracted attention from the highest levels of the Galactic Defense Force, she said. Several senior officers have requested copies of your tactical analysis. Jinho felt a mixture of pride and uncertainty. What does that mean, sir? It means the commander. Graduation day at the Galactic Military Academy dawned with a ceremony unlike any in the institution. 300-year history representatives from every major species in the galaxy had come to witness what military historians were already calling the most significant tactical demonstration in modern warfare. Jinho stood in formation with the other graduating cadets wearing the pristine uniform of a galactic defender, but he felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon him. News of his performance in the Crucible had spread throughout known space, and military academies on dozens of worlds were requesting copies of his tactical analyses. The Academy commander took the stage, followed by Fleet Admiral Zorian himself, the supreme commander of all Galactic Defense Forces. The ancient Etherian warrior had not attended an Academy graduation in over 50 years, but Jinho's achievement had drawn him from his duties at the Galactic Capital. Distinguished cadets, the Admiral began in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in dozens of major conflicts. Today we witness the graduation of exceptional warriors who will carry the responsibility of protecting our civilization. Jinho listened as the Admiral spoke about duty, honor, and sacrifice, but his mind wandered to the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had been the weakest cadet in Academy history. Now he stood as the top graduate with tactical scores that had broken every existing record. The individual award ceremony began, and Jinho watched as his classmates received recognition for their achievements. Cracks earned the medal for exceptional physical prowess. Jess received honors for advanced combat techniques. Rezek was recognized for outstanding speed and agility. When Jinho's name was called, the entire assembly fell silent. Admiral Zorian stepped forward, carrying a medal that Jinho had only seen in Academy history books. The Star of Strategic Excellence, awarded only to those whose tactical innovations changed the nature of warfare itself. Cadet Jinho of Earth, the Admiral announced, your performance in the Crucible simulation has been reviewed by the Strategic Planning Council and deemed to represent a fundamental advancement in military science. Jinho walked forward on unsteady legs and stood at attention while the Admiral continued speaking. Your tactical methods have been studied by senior officers throughout the galaxy and have already been Incorporated into training programs on 17 different worlds, you have proven that human strategic thinking offers unique advantages that complement the natural abilities of other species. The Admiral placed the heavy metal around Jinho's neck and spoke in a voice meant only for him. Young warrior, you have opened doors that will benefit not only your species, but all beings who value freedom and justice. The galaxy is in your debt. As Jinho returned to formation, he caught sight of Yuki, who was beaming with pride, and Krax, who nodded with the deep respect that had grown between them over the months of training. Even Jess, who had once considered humans worthless, was applauding with genuine enthusiasm, but the ceremony was not finished. Admiral Zorian gestured for silence and continued. The graduation assignments for this class include several unprecedented appointments. Cadet Jinho has been offered a position on the Strategic Planning Council itself as the youngest tactical advisor. In galactic history, the assembly erupted in amazed murmurs. Jinho felt his knees go weak as he realized what this meant. The Strategic Planning Council advised the Admiral himself on major military decisions affecting entire star systems. It was a position that veteran officers spent decades hoping to achieve. However, the Admiral continued, we understand that some of you may prefer frontline assignments where you can serve directly with the warriors you have trained alongside. Therefore, alternative postings have been prepared. Jinho listened as his classmates received their assignments. Krax would command a heavy assault unit on the frontier worlds. Jis was assigned to special operations behind enemy lines. Rizak would lead rapid response forces protecting shipping lanes from pirates. When it came to Jinho's turn, Admiral Zorian smiled slightly before speaking. Cadet Jinho, you have been offered command of the newly formed Tactical Innovation Unit, a mixed species force designed to test and implement unconventional warfare strategies. Your unit will include volunteers from multiple species who specifically requested to serve under your command. Jinho felt his heart racing as he realized that his former classmates had volunteered to continue serving with him. The bonds forged in training had created a unit unlike any in galactic military history. The graduation ceremony concluded with the traditional oath-taking, but Jinho barely heard the words. His mind was already racing with possibilities for the new unit. The combination of alien, natural abilities with human tactical innovation could create something unprecedented. After the ceremony ended, Jinho found himself surrounded by reporters from news services across the galaxy. They wanted to know everything about the human who had revolutionized military thinking and what his success meant for human integration into galactic society. One reporter asked the question that Jinho had been dreading. What message do you have for other humans who dream of joining the galactic military? Jinho thought carefully before answering. We may not have the natural advantages of other species, but we have something equally valuable. We have the ability to see problems from different angles and find solutions that others miss. He paused and looked around at the alien faces, listening to his words. My success does not mean that humans are superior to other species. It means that diversity makes us all stronger. When different perspectives work together, we can achieve things that none of us could accomplish alone. Later that evening, Jinho stood once again on the observation deck, but this time he was not alone. Yuki, Krax, Jis, and Rizek had all joined him to watch the stars and discuss their upcoming assignments. The Tactical Innovation Unit would be based on a frontier world where they would have freedom to develop and test new strategies. The unit members came from 8 different species, but they all shared one thing in common. They believed that Jinho leadership could help them become better warriors. You know that everything changes now, Yuki said quietly. You are no longer just another cadet trying to prove himself. You are a symbol of what humans can contribute to the galaxy. Jinho nodded slowly, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with his new position. But he also felt a deep satisfaction knowing that he had found his purpose among the stars. Krax rumbled with amusement as he spoke. I remember when I first saw you, weak and small and seemingly useless. Now I would follow you into battle against any enemy in the galaxies. Floated nearby with an expression that might have been pride. We all learned something from you, human, she said. You taught us that strength comes in many forms and that the greatest weapon is often the Mindritzek. Clicked his mandibles in agreement. The speed of thought can be more valuable than the speed of body, he said. Your tactics have made all of us better warriors. As they talked, Jinho realized that his journey at the academy had taught him something profound about the nature of strength and leadership. He had not succeeded by becoming like the other species, but by embracing what made humans unique. The next morning brought new orders and the beginning of his real career as a galactic defender. Jinho packed his few belongings and prepared to leave the academy that had transformed him from an uncertain young man into a confident leader. Walking through the corridors one last time, he noticed the subtle changes his presence had created. New human cadets were arriving each month, and they were no longer met with laughter or dismissal. Instead, they were welcomed as potential tactical assets whose unique perspectives could benefit any unit. In the library, he found a display case that had not been there when he arrived. It contained copies of his tactical analyses from the Crucible simulation, along with a plaque that read Lieutenant Jinho of Earth 1st Human Graduate Academy Class 2387, Pioneer of Integrated Tactical Doctrine, proof that diversity is strength. Jinho smiled as he read those words and realized that his legacy was already inspiring others. The academy that had once seemed impossible to survive had become the place where he discovered his true potential. As his transport ship departed the academy station, Jinho looked back at the facility that had changed his life forever. New cadets were arriving every day, including more humans who would no longer face the ridicule and doubt that he had endured. They would still have to prove themselves through hard work and determination, but they would do so knowing that a human had already walked this path and shown it was possible to succeed. The laughter that had once greeted human cadets had been replaced by respect and expectation. Jinho settled back in his seat and began reviewing the files for his new unit. The Tactical Innovation Unit represented everything he had learned about the power of diversity and cooperation. Different species working together using their unique strengths to achieve common goals. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, full of challenges that would test everything he had learned. But Jinho no longer felt like the weak human who had stumbled off a transport ship over a year ago. He had become something that even he had not imagined possible: a leader whose tactical brilliance would protect worlds, and whose example would inspire generations of humans to reach for the stars. The quiet determination that had carried him through months of failure had transformed him into